My name is Hannah Blake. That morning, all I wanted was to withdraw $50 to buy medicine for a homeless man, the one who once saved me from a terrible night no one else cared to notice. But when I walked into the bank, my sister, Lauren Blake, the branch manager, stood in front of everyone and laughed out loud. A waitress trying to take out money here. This is a bank, not a charity. Every eye turned to me like I was some kind of joke in a room I didn't belong in. No one knew that just a few days later I would have full control of that entire institution. The bank, the name, and the pride they used to wear like a badge. Have you ever had your own family make you feel small and worthless? If you've ever been through that, leave a comment below. I read every one of them. Don't forget to like and subscribe to follow along. Because what happened next, no one in my family could have seen coming. I grew up in a 2-story colonial house on the outskirts of Cincinnati, where every picture on the wall revolved around one person, Lauren. Valedictorian, state debate champion, honor intern at the biggest bank in the state. Every achievement of hers was carefully framed and hung in the most visible spots. Me. My high school diploma was shoved into a drawer behind the kitchen cabinet, next to some old appliance manuals. Lauren never called me her sister. To her, I was just the other one in the house. One time I made a handmade birthday card for Mom. It took me nearly 3 hours to cut, glue, and draw every little detail. Lauren walked in, dropped an expensive perfume box on the table and said, "This is yours, Mom. I'll just leave it here." Mom beamed, hugged Lauren, and then turned to me like she didn't even see the card still in my hand. I got accepted into a prestigious tech institute on the East Coast, with a scholarship I earned after 2 years of grinding at the public library. When I brought the acceptance letter into the living room, Mom glanced at it and said, "Who's going to take care of your dad if you go that far?" At the time, my father had just been diagnosed with late-stage pancreatic cancer. No one asked if I could make arrangements or if I could study remotely. The conversation ended with me folding the letter into a shoebox and quietly taking a part-time job at the neighborhood bakery to help pay for his medicine. And Lauren? She didn't come home. She was too busy being nominated for assistant branch director. Dad passed away on a rainy day. I still remember the sound of rain hammering the porch roof while I stood behind the church doors, shivering. Lauren read the eulogy in a choked voice, talking about the father who taught her how to seize opportunity, how to command a room. Not once did she mention me. I stood less than 15 feet from the podium, but I felt like I was on the other side of the world. After the funeral, Lauren walked over, placed a hand on my shoulder like she was bestowing pity. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. "Good. Because everything's going to change now, Hannah. I'll take care of Mom. You do whatever feels right to you." I moved out not long after that. A 3rd-floor walk-up apartment with no elevator, right next to the train tracks. Every night, the sound of steel wheels grinding on rails reminded me I was living off pocket change. I worked as a waitress at a small diner. No luxury hotels, no VIP cards, no one calling me Miss with respect. Just receipts, fryer oil, and rushed orders shouted over the clatter. But at night, when the city started to sleep, I powered up my laptop. The old thing had a scratch across the top right corner of the screen and a few sticky keys, but it was my only window into another world. I studied programming through free videos, typing line after line of code to the soundtrack of passing trains and the glow of streetlights filtering through my window. I started by redesigning the diner's website, then took odd jobs fixing online menus for mom-and-pop shops around the block. Some nights, I worked until nearly 3 a.m. just to finish an order for a pizza place in another state. The owner had no idea who I was, just called me Dev Hannah. But when he wired the payment, his note said, "Thanks. This is the first time the system's run this smooth." I printed out that message and taped it next to my desk. It wasn't flashy like Lauren's certificates, but it was the only proof I had back then that I wasn't worthless. I didn't see Lauren for years. Not because I was angry, because she never called. Mom would occasionally text asking me to help cover home repairs, saying Lauren had already taken on so much. I sent the money. No one asked how I was doing, whether I had enough. I didn't tell them either, because what would have changed? I slowly learned to wear silence like armor. When you've been ignored long enough, disappearing starts to feel like relief. But once, while waiting for a late train after a shift, I found a man passed out on a bench. I called an ambulance. His name was Carver. A former engineer who used to work for a major firm in Texas, wiped out after a financial lawsuit. We talked for almost an hour. When I mentioned I was teaching myself cybersecurity systems, his eyes lit up. Kid, he said, if you really understand the value of financial security, you could change the way the whole banking system works. I laughed, thinking he was just trying to be kind. But he looked at me dead serious. I said the same thing to a Stanford student once. He now runs a venture capital firm. It's not about where you go to school. It's about whether anyone actually listens to you. That sentence cracked something small in the wall I'd built for years. It was also the last time I saw Mr. Carver, until many years later when I walked into Lauren's bank, not as someone trying to withdraw $50, but as the owner of a fund powerful enough to freeze the entire institution with a single click. And that's when everything began to change. I met Eli Turner on a rainy evening at the diner where I worked. He always sat at the back corner table, knit cap pulled low, laptop tilted sideways, and he always ordered the same thing: ham sandwich with ginger tea. Customers like that usually caught my attention, not because they were memorable but because they weren't. They were quiet, predictable, consistent. That night the ordering system crashed. The manager was furious, the kitchen in chaos, and I'd been on my feet so long I could feel the sting through my socks. As I dropped off Eli's bill, I muttered without thinking, "Wish someone would just rebuild our ordering system already." He looked up, gray eyes, quiet voice like someone who'd been talking to machines all day. "People don't rebuild things unless they believe it'll collapse." It didn't sound like something a customer would say. Curious, I sat on the edge of the chair across from him while waiting on another table. "You work in software?" Eli gave a faint smile, then turned his laptop toward me. On the screen was a live encryption map, packets of data flowing and disappearing by the second. "I design security protocols for stealth transaction platforms. No logs, no cache, no identity trail." He paused, sipping his tea. "I'm looking for someone with organizational mind, someone to build a new system. But I'm not great with people." I paused, then asked directly, "Where'd you used to work?" "Former head of digital security at a financial firm in San Jose. I left when they signed a third-party deal with a history of data breaches." A guy like that sitting in a cheap diner talking code to a waitress? I should have been skeptical. But for some reason I believed him. Maybe it was the way he spoke. No showboating, no pretense, just exactly what needed to be said. We started exchanging notes after each shift. First on napkins, then by email, and later I'd bring my laptop to his tiny apartment. A near-empty space with a recliner, a desk, and walls plastered with encryption notes. He named the project Nocturne Vault. I asked why Nocturne. He smiled. "Because it's written in the dark to preserve silence for the things that matter." I handled the asset flow design, built trust chains through layered jurisdictions. I went from managing online orders to running cold wallets for digital currencies. All those fragmented skills I'd picked up on YouTube? Now they had a place to belong. We operated in the shadows. No HQ, no traceable accounts. Just rotating identifiers, shell companies from Delaware to Luxembourg, and numbers moving quietly across invisible rails. 2.5 years in, Vault hit $3.9 billion in assets. No fundraising, no marketing. Everything came from trust. Earned, never borrowed. We protected those overlooked by traditional banks. Small business owners, independent women, people written off because of outdated credit scores. Eli wasn't much of a talker, but working with him taught me the value of precision and grit. There were nights I stayed up till sunrise over a single typo in code. He never yelled. He simply slid the coffee toward me and said, "Just a tiny bug, but it ripples through the whole circuit." We never asked about each other's past. But I knew Eli had once been betrayed by the very system he helped build. And I had been denied by my family for years. Maybe that's why Vault wasn't just a place to store money. It was a vault to preserve the worth of those the world had written off. In the 36th month, when our assets hit $4.2 billion, I realized I had a chance to do something no one else had done. I could become a strategic investor, under the identity of an anonymous holding company, into banks in desperate need of capital without demanding voting shares. And the first bank I targeted was the one where Lauren worked as branch director. I studied the public financial reports thoroughly. Her branch was struggling with liquidity issues, stemming from a wave of small business loans that defaulted after COVID. I didn't intervene directly. I simply had Vault invest in the parent bank, on the condition that Lauren's branch would be used as a pilot for performance review. I still remember the feeling when I saw my sister's name in the internal document. Branch performance under review. Assigned to Shell Holdings Funding Division. None of them knew Shell Holdings was the investment arm of Vault. And Vault was me. I didn't do it for revenge. I just wanted to see what happens when someone is forced to be humble, without knowing who they're bowing to. I wasn't there to change them. But I could change the rules. And from that moment on, the lines of power slowly began to turn in reverse. I didn't sleep much the night before everything began to shift. A light rain tapped the railing outside like a persistent whisper. I sat at my desk, the lamp casting soft yellow light across neatly stacked folders wrapped in black leather. Under that glow, the letter marked Emergency Audit Request, Internal Priority, looked cold and firm, almost emotionless. Yet inside was a story Lauren never imagined would come to light. I'd spent weeks verifying what I first heard from a retired branch employee, an older woman who used to be a credit officer. She'd been quietly forced into early retirement after questioning an unusual withdrawal from an elderly client's account. She said one sentence that froze me. "Hannah, some signatures look real but they're not." I traced the paperwork through Vault's back-end access, granted through our stake in the parent bank. It didn't take long to spot the patterns. 3 accounts, all belonging to elderly clients living alone, had been manipulated. Funds quietly redirected into a private company under the name of someone related to Lauren. Coincidentally, the same man who accompanied her to Dad's funeral. I sent the full report to the CEO's office at the parent bank. What I submitted wasn't just financial data. It was indisputable evidence of a branch director violating ethical protocol, exposing the institution to serious reputational and legal risk if exposed. I signed it as a representative of Shell Holdings' strategic investor. The appointment was confirmed in less than 30 minutes. The schedule was updated directly into the high-security system. I didn't use my real name. All it took was a unique ID, investment credentials, and a signed proxy. No one had reason to question it. The next morning, I wore a dark suit, hair tied back neatly. No perfume. No flashy jewelry. Just one old watch. Dad's only birthday gift to me from when I was the kid always taking apart electronics. I stepped out of the car right in front of Lauren's branch. Not a flicker of hesitation. The receptionist looked up and froze. "Good morning, how can I help you?" "I have a 9 o'clock appointment." "Shell Holdings." She fumbled at her screen. Instantly, the interface switched to internal alert mode. My name appeared with a notice. "Special priority. Private meeting required. Branch manager verification pending." I heard hurried heels clicking from the back of the lobby. Lauren appeared, hair flat-ironed to perfection, cream-colored dress tailored to every curve, her face tightening as she saw me. "Hannah." "Blake," I answered, using the title the system assigned to VIP client interactions. He blinked, stunned. "What are you doing here?" I didn't answer. Instead, I calmly pulled out a black folder from my bag, opened to the first page, and placed it on the desk in front of her. "I need to verify the branch manager's identity to complete audit procedures." She blinked again, clearly confused. "Audit? Who sent?" "Not me," I cut in, eyes steady. "Shell Holdings. I'm just the representative." I saw her hands tremble slightly as she picked up the top sheet. Her face drained of color as her eyes scanned the numbers. Then she turned to page 3, a screenshot comparing 2 digital signatures. One belonged to the actual client. The other, forged and used to authorize a fund transfer. She stepped back. "No. This must be a system glitch. Maybe there's been a mistake." "There's no mistake. Vault's system logs every byte of every transaction, including the IP address of the terminal used." Right then, the parent bank senior manager walked in. Gray suit, tall frame, silver hair. The kind of man who doesn't blink during crisis. He walked straight over, scanned the folder, and signaled the receptionist. "Freeze all branch operations. Reason: special audit per strategic investor request. No clients. No transactions. No explanations." The entire lobby froze in utter silence. Staff halted mid-task. A few customers standing at ATMs stepped away slowly. Lauren turned toward me. Her voice barely a whisper. "Who are you, Hannah? What the hell are you doing here?" I answered flatly, never raising my voice. You once said I was a burden. A waitress. An embarrassment to this family. I bent down, picked up the folder, closed it neatly, and locked eyes with her. All I did was alert the parent bank to a crack you should have seen yourself. She didn't respond. Her face pale, her eyes wide, like she was watching the entire world turn inside out. The manager escorted me to the private conference room. As the glass door slid shut, I glanced back and saw Lauren still standing, legs unsteady. Then, like the final weight had landed, she collapsed, knees hitting the cold marble floor, hands bracing herself, lips moving but making no sound. I didn't turn back. Not because I was cold, but because I hadn't waited all these years just to watch her fall. I'd waited to know that I no longer stood in the shadows. I had stepped into the light, with the very silence they once mistook for weakness. And that was what they never saw coming. 2 days after the bank incident, I was making tea in my small kitchen when there was a knock on the door. Not the firm rap of a delivery driver or the hesitant tap of the upstairs neighbor. It was soft, slow, like someone unsure they should be there. I opened the door. My mother stood there, wrapped in a charcoal gray wool coat, holding a bouquet of pale pink roses and a box of cinnamon rolls from the old bakery I used to love as a child. "Hi, sweetheart," she said, lips quivering slightly. I was passing by and thought maybe you'd want some pastries." I stood still for a moment, looking at her like I was trying to figure out whether this was the same woman who'd once pretended I didn't exist at family dinners, or someone else wearing her face. I said quietly, "I thought you were allergic to pollen?" She gave a stiff smile and adjusted the bouquet. "I am. But this time I thought, maybe you needed to see them more than I needed to avoid them." I didn't invite her in. But I didn't close the door either. He understood. She stood still, her gaze drifting into the room behind me, where everything was simple, nothing extravagant but clean and in order. "I didn't come here to ask anything," she continued. "I just wanted you to know. I know I've been silent for too long." I didn't reply. She placed the pastry box on the step and turned to leave without waiting. That evening, I received a message from Lauren. The screen showed only one line: "I need to talk." "Who are you?" I read the message 3 times, not for the words but for the way she wrote them. No more commands. No sarcasm. Just confusion. And maybe a trace of fear. That same day, Clarice, my cousin who had always sided with Lauren, sent a short email. "Aunt Margaret wants to host a family dinner. Everyone's invited. Hope you can come." No apology. No explanation. But I understood. They were pivoting. No longer sure who was holding the axis. I tapped the edge of my desk, eyes drifting past the window frame. Early winter skies in Ohio were cold, gray, and indifferent. Part of me wanted to say no. But another part, the one I'd buried through countless late nights over a glowing screen, wanted to face it. Not to provoke, but to see what truth, if any, remained in something that had long since rotted. I replied, "I'll come. But I'm not coming alone." The following evening I chose a navy blouse and light gray slacks. No makeup, no lipstick, just a silver ring I liked to fidget with when I needed to steady myself. Eli picked me up in the same old car he'd used since his freelance days. He didn't ask much. Just glanced at me and said, "Want me beside you or wait outside?" I smiled softly. Beside me. We arrived at the restaurant at 6:50. It was the same place my family always used for special occasions. Birthdays, anniversaries, Christmases, the ones where I was never mentioned in any toast. The host led us to the private room in the back. Frosted glass doors, soft amber pendant lights. On the table sat wine bottles, napkins folded into swans, and a name card at the center of the orchids: Blake family. Lauren saw me first. Her eyes paused briefly on Eli, then shifted to me. She didn't speak, just nodded slightly. My mother sat next to her, hands around a teacup, eyes fixed on the tablecloth. Clarice, as always, sat upright like she was at a fundraiser dinner. I pulled out my chair and sat down. Eli took the seat beside me. No one started the conversation. Just the faint sound of a spoon clinking gently against a glass as a server poured water. Eventually, my mother broke the silence. "Hannah, I know you have every reason to be angry. But I think maybe we should set things down and start over." I lifted my glass but didn't drink. And what would we be starting over with? A box of pastries or the decades of silence? Clarice chimed in, her voice unusually soft. Everyone's made mistakes, sis. But it's over now, isn't it? I turned to meet her eyes directly. Is it? When the family's own bank is still under internal review. When Lauren still hasn't answered the simplest question. Who she thinks I am. Lauren set her glass down. I don't know. She looked straight at me. I don't know what you've done, how you ended up there, or how you made everything flip like that. But I know one thing. I was wrong to think you'd always stay behind. The silence that followed settled over the table like the season's first layer of snow. I glanced at Eli, then back to my mother. I didn't come here to destroy anything. I came here because I need to know if the people who cast me aside have the courage to look back. No one responded. But no one looked away. And that was the first step I never thought I'd see. The air in the room began to thicken. I sat still, hands clasped in my lap, feeling the steady pulse at my wrist. Lauren sat across from me, eyes locked on the untouched wine glass, fingers curled around its stem like it was the last thing holding her upright. My mother let out a breath, then leaned slightly toward me, her voice low but clear enough for everyone to hear. Hannah, I know this hurt you. But now you have power and you could help your sister. We should begin again. You could help Lauren get her job back. That didn't make me angry. It didn't land like a stab. More like a single off note in a symphony that had been out of tune for years. Silently, I reached into my bag and pulled out the black leather folder. The one containing the financial control agreement over the branch and the signed authority transfer from the parent bank CEO. I placed it on the table. I didn't slide it to anyone, because everyone who needed to see it was already watching. This is a copy of the investment contract between Shell Holdings and the parent bank, I said calmly. And this is the letter of authorization from the CEO, confirming internal restructuring rights under the investor's oversight. Clarice cleared her throat lightly as if something had caught. My mother widened her eyes. Lauren said nothing. She just looked up at me, her face caught between disbelief and resignation. I met her gaze. For the past 2 years, you've worked indirectly for Shell Holdings, which means for me. When I submitted the report to the system, it was me who triggered the audit. When I requested the temporary branch lockdown, that authority came from me. I paused. I didn't come here to hand anything out. And I'm not here to save anyone. Especially not the person who once laughed in my face when I tried to withdraw a few bucks to help a homeless man. Lauren inhaled slowly and set her glass down. Her voice was hoarse, softer than usual. You don't understand. I didn't know what you were doing. I thought you were still the girl waiting tables. You never said anything. I cut in. Exactly. I said nothing. Just like you said nothing about me at Dad's funeral. Just like Mom never asked if I wanted to go back to school. I didn't speak, because I knew if I told the truth, you'd find a way to dismiss it. And if I failed, Mom would use it to prove you were the only one who stayed on track. Clarice shifted in her seat, trying to smile. Maybe we were wrong to underestimate you. But Hannah, you have to admit, doing it all in secret like that, it's a little cruel. I turned to her, my gaze no longer soft. Cruel? Was it cruel when I worked until 3 in the morning and wiped tables again at 7 because no one in this family believed I deserved a scholarship? Was it cruel when my sister forged signatures to redirect elderly clients' money into her boyfriend's company? Or when my mother heard about it and said, I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding? I don't think I'm cruel. I just stopped letting people use me as their shadow. My mother turned away. I didn't know if it was to hide tears, or simply to avoid watching something she no longer had control over. Lauren stood, gripping the chair's back. If I resign, will you let it go? I stared straight at her. I didn't come here to negotiate. I came here to remind everyone that silence doesn't mean stupidity. And that one person's humility is not an invitation to be walked on. The whole room fell still. The clink of cutlery from a nearby table, the quiet tap of glassware on wood, the distant hum of background music. All of it faded into dissonance. I stood up and slid the folder into my bag. Eli rose with me. I glanced around the table, my voice no longer tense, just firm and resolute. I don't need forgiveness. I'm not asking for a seat back in this family. I just want everyone to know, I've claimed my own seat. And none of you get to put your hand on it anymore. I turned to leave. And no one stopped me. Not a single person. I got back to my apartment just before 10 p.m. The streetlight cast a golden glow on the window pane, a soft blur stretching across the worn wooden floor. I hung up my coat, slipped off my shoes, and made a cup of peppermint tea. My mind was still echoing with the unfinished sentences from that dinner table. But strangely, I wasn't angry. It just felt light, like I had finally put something down after carrying it for too many years. While washing my hands in the kitchen, the doorbell rang. It wasn't a knock, it was the doorbell. I opened the door and saw a man holding a cream envelope sealed with red wax. "Are you Hannah Blake?" he asked. I nodded. He gave a polite nod in return and placed the envelope in my hands. "I'm an assistant to Mr. Lawrence Trent, attorney at law. This is a document he was instructed to deliver to you on this exact date." I signed for it. The door closed, and in my hand the envelope felt heavier than it looked. I sat at the table, moved my tea aside, and opened it. Inside were 2 sets of documents: a notarized copy of a trust fund in my name and an excerpt from my father's personal journal, written in his familiar hand, slightly left-leaning, pressure-heavy at the end of each line, his unmistakable style. I read the trust first. It had been created in April, 2 years before he passed. The name of the fund: the Hannah Initiative for STEM Girls. Purpose: to support tuition, educational materials, and internship opportunities for underprivileged young women pursuing science, technology, engineering, and math. Beneficiary and administrator: Hannah Blake. Activation date: my 25th birthday. I remembered that day clearly. I worked the night shift, celebrated with a tiny cake and a broken candle. No one in my family called. I didn't know that just a few miles away at a law office, there was a document already prepared, just waiting to be activated. At the end of the file, I saw a small italic note: beneficiary changed on June 17th per request of Margaret Blake. Reason stated: necessary to ensure more effective use of the fund. June 17th. Just 2 weeks after my father's final hospitalization. I picked up the journal excerpt. It was a copy of 3 handwritten pages, unadorned, untitled. Just a string of connected thoughts, some slightly faded from old ink. "I don't know if I'll have enough time to fix everything. Lauren is good at pleasing people. But Hannah is the only one who knows how to build instead of take. Even as a child, she had patience with what wasn't perfect. Even when no one noticed, she kept trying. The way she quietly repaired that broken wing robot without complaint, without asking for help, that's what I couldn't look away from. I created this fund to give her a chance I didn't know how to offer in words. I didn't have the courage to protect her in front of Margaret. But I hope that one day she'll know. I always saw her." I folded the pages, holding them with both hands, palms trembling slightly. Not because of the money, not because of the title, but because for the first time in years, I had concrete proof that I wasn't invisible to the person who raised me. I remembered once when I was a kid, I asked my dad, "Why don't you tell Mom that I can do things too?" He gave a soft chuckle, pulled me into his lap, and whispered, "Because I want you to believe it without anyone needing to say it." I hadn't understood then. But now I do. That was a kind of silent belief. Not flashy, not loud, but steady, like roots growing deep underground. I stood up and pulled out an old planning map from the drawer. On one side were the notes I scribbled when Vault first began. On the other, a list of ideas I never had the resources to pursue. In the center, I had once written in messy black ink, "A place for those who've been forgotten." I took a new tack and pinned the copy of the trust deed next to that line. I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt like I had a reason to keep going, not to prove anything to my family, but because someone had seen me even in silence. And sometimes that alone is enough to begin again. The board meeting was held in a glass-walled conference room on the top floor of the bank's headquarters. The city skyline stretched beyond the windows, skyscrapers reflecting on the river in the distance. I arrived 10 minutes early, carrying a slim leather portfolio and a crisp printout of the internal restructuring plan Eli and I had spent weeks perfecting. The secretary greeted me with a nervous glance. Though they had all been briefed on my authority as a strategic investor, I knew they still didn't fully understand how a woman who just appeared on their radar could hold so much sway over their entire financial structure. "This way, please. The board is ready," she said quietly, opening the heavy wooden door into that space of power. 7 people sat around the oval table, the regional executive director, legal counsel, 2 independent board members, a major shareholder representative, and 2 from the internal audit division. All dressed sharply, faces taut. I didn't make them wait. "I'll get straight to the point," I began, my voice calm and clear. "As the authorized representative of Shell Holdings, strategic investor and current capital coordinator for 4 regional branches, I'm formally proposing a full restructuring of the Eastern Division management team." One member raised an eyebrow. The man in the gray pinstripe suit at the end of the table asked, "Are you suggesting a complete overhaul or just a few adjustments?" "I propose a full restructuring, based on 2 criteria: professional ethics and operational performance." I handed out the nearly 40-page report, along with a summary of internal metrics neglected over the past 6 quarters. Among them, Lauren's branch ranked lowest in transparency when handling service requests from at-risk populations. "I'm not here to stir chaos," I continued. "I'm here to rebuild trust." A moment of silence. Then Mr. Harland, the head of internal audit, pushed his glasses up his nose, flipped a few pages and nodded. "The report is clear. It's probably time for change." I continued, steady as if reading straight from my own thoughts. "I recommend the immediate termination of Branch Director Lauren Blake's executive duties. However," I paused. Every board member's eyes shifted to me. "I do not propose complete removal. Instead, I recommend reassigning her to an operational advisory role with no managerial authority at base-level compensation, on a 6-month contract with performance review." "Reason?" one member asked. "Because I believe in giving people the chance to see themselves more clearly through real work. And because sometimes, being forced to start over is the only way to understand what value you once took for granted." No one objected. Some nodded. Others stayed quiet. The record was documented on the spot. The meeting shifted to reallocation of investment streams. I presented the plan to redirect nearly 60% of Shell Holdings' capital away from pure financial markets into developing technology education infrastructure. I intend to launch a network of free programming training centers specifically for women in difficult circumstances, starting in Cincinnati, then expanding to 3 neighboring states. Each center will be fully equipped, staffed with professional instructors, and linked directly to employers who need real talent. The eldest board member, Ms. Marlene, who had remained silent the entire meeting, finally spoke. "This is the first time I've heard of an investor choosing to pull out of finance to invest in people." I offered a faint smile. "That's because I was once one of the people the system overlooked." The meeting ended in order. As I stepped out of the room, the midday sun slanted through the glass corridor, casting a golden ribbon across the carpet. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt aligned. Later that afternoon, I received an internal email. Lauren had signed to accept the advisory role with no additional conditions. No message. No notes. But I knew, to put pen to that line probably cost her more than a night's sleep. That evening, Eli and I visited the first site in Walnut Hills, a former warehouse lot near the high school. I pointed to the stained walls and windows boarded up since the last decade. "This will be the beginning," I said. Eli crossed his arms, surveying the view, then turned to me. "Are you sure? This project's going to cost blood and time." "I'm sure," I replied. "Because in this place there will be girls just like I once was. And I don't want them to wait until they're holding billions to believe they're worthy." I looked up at the faded gray metal roof, where the setting light cut across in diagonal beams like a measure of time. And I knew, an old cycle had just closed. And something new, something stronger was taking root right there on the ground others had forgotten. That afternoon, the weather turned colder unexpectedly, though the forecast had called for sun. I wrapped an old knit scarf around my neck, the same scarf that had followed me through so many rain-drenched walks home from the diner. I didn't drive. I wanted to walk, to let the sound of my steps on the sidewalk carry me back to a place that had once been my entire world. A place where no one knew my name and no one needed to. The diner on the corner was still there. The paint on the outside had faded, the sign hung slightly askew from the wind, but the scent of grilled meat still drifted from the windows like it never left. I stopped at the bench beside the old phone booth where Mr. Carver used to sit. He was still there, worn shoes, faded army coat, holding a creased book with its spine broken, eyes closed like he was listening to a song no one else could hear. As I approached, he looked up, a bit confused at first, then squinting. "It's you." I sat beside him, gently resting my leather folder on my lap, and pulled out a set of documents. "I have something for you," I said. I opened the folder, flipped to the first page, and handed it to him. The bold heading read, "Lifetime Personal Housing Agreement." Carver read a few lines, then looked up at me in disbelief. "Is this real?" I nodded. "I purchased the building where you've been staying. It's been transferred to a non-profit housing cooperative. You're no longer a tenant. You're a protected member for life. No one can evict you. Not for money, not for time." He placed a trembling hand on the paper. His eyes began to well up. Why would you do this?" I looked at him for a long moment before answering. "Because on a winter night 7 years ago, after I'd just been yelled at by a customer and burned my hand behind the kitchen, you were the one who asked, 'Are you okay?' And because you were the first to tell me, 'You don't have to be anybody, just don't disappear from this world.'" He bowed his head, tears falling onto the page. I placed my hand on his shoulder. "I can't change the whole world," I continued, "but I can start with the person who once gave me faith in myself when no one else did." He wiped his face with his sleeve, voice hoarse. "It's been a long time since anyone looked at me like I was worth keeping around." I gave his shoulder a light squeeze. "I felt that way before too." We sat there in silence for a long time. A light breeze drifted by, carrying the scent of damp wood and meat grilling from the diner's back kitchen. There was something about that moment that made my heart ache, not with sadness, but with the weight of having finally returned, not in silence, but with the power to mend something in the world that had once been so cold to both of us. A young server from the diner came outside holding 2 cups of hot coffee. He gave a small nod. "Hannah, they said this is what you always ordered. No milk, no sugar. On the house." I accepted the coffee with both hands, looking at the boy whose face reminded me of myself at 23. I nodded and gave a small smile. "Thank you." Carver turned to me, squinting. "So, you're someone important now?" I chuckled softly, taking a sip. "No. I'm just someone who once had nothing, and now I'm trying to use what I have to keep a little kindness in this life." He nodded, then smiled with his lips folded inward. "Then don't forget. Kindness doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to last." In my hands, the agreement was now signed, the ink still fresh. One copy I'd keep. The other would go to the city housing office. A small thing, insignificant to the world. But to someone who'd once been seen as disposable, it could be the last doorway out of darkness. And for me, it was the only thank you I knew how to give. Not with money, not with titles, but through action. One time for the person who believed in me before I even believed in myself. Mornings at Eden Hill Park always held a certain quiet, not an emptiness but a depth, as if every leaf and branch were guarding stories they hadn't yet told. I sat on a wooden bench beneath an old oak tree, my light coat wrapped loosely around me, holding a small, faded notebook I'd kept in a wooden box under my bed for nearly 10 years. It was the notebook my father once gave me. No inscription, no fancy wrapping. Just a hand-stitched journal with rough paper and a pale brown cover, the top right corner slightly curled like it had once been wet. I turned the pages, glancing over his familiar handwriting, notes he wrote for himself. Watering schedules, petty expenses, sometimes a stray poem or a short question with no answer like, "If I'm wrong, then what is right?" The last page was where I stopped. Just one sentence written with darker ink than the rest. "The loudest person isn't always right. The one who rebuilds after being cast aside is the one living right." I ran my fingers lightly over the words as if I could touch my father's voice through the paper. Some things are never said aloud, but they sit there, quiet and solid like the spine of a life. I looked up toward the other side of the park, where the morning sun was slowly spreading across the roof of the newly renovated building. 3 stories, white walls with gray trim, large windows catching the natural light, a soft breeze tugging at the flag out front. The sign at the gate read clearly in simple lettering, "The Hannah Project." Inside, orientation for the first cohort was about to begin. Nearly 30 young women, some pregnant, some with toddlers, some who had once worked at shuttered textile mills, were gathering in front of the whiteboard, where Eli was introducing the training platform. I used to dream of a place like this. Not to shape others into versions of me, but to offer what I once longed for. The chance to be seen, to be heard, and to build something with their own hands. Not waiting to be lifted, not waiting for permission. My phone buzzed softly in my coat pocket. A message from Mom. She wrote, "Can I come to the center today? I just want to sit quietly. I don't need to talk." I didn't respond right away. I set the phone down beside the notebook, my hands folded in my lap. There was a time when I searched for acceptance, hoping for a different look from my mother, a word of praise from Lauren, any form of recognition from the people I called family. But now that I had truly found my footing, I understood that what I needed wasn't validation. It was clarity. Knowing who stood with me and who simply stood near me because they were afraid I'd move to higher ground. My mother could come. And if all she did was sit quietly, I would let her. No apology necessary. No explanation required. Maybe at a certain age, silent presence is rarer and more powerful than 1,000 tangled words. A breeze passed by, tugging my scarf off center. I adjusted it, then looked toward the entrance of the center. A young woman was standing there, nervous, her worn-out backpack nearly bursting open, a few notebooks spilling onto the ground. I stood up and walked over to help her pick them up. "Thank you," she murmured, barely above a breath. "I'm a little scared. I don't know if I can keep up." I smiled. I used to think the same. But if you've made it here, it means you're no longer where you were. Just keep going. She nodded, gripping her backpack straps tightly, then stepped inside. I watched her go, the morning light catching the shoulder of her jacket in a long streak, like the start line of a new path. I returned to the bench, picked up the notebook, and sat for a while longer. There was no hollowness in me now. No lingering anger. No waiting for someone to say the right thing. I had withdrawn all the trust and love I once gave to places that made me feel small, that made me doubt my worth. And I had reinvested it in places that deserved it. In people like Mr. Carver, like that girl who just stepped through the door, and in the version of me from all those years ago. And strangely enough, when I stopped waiting for something from them, I finally began to feel like I truly belonged. Not in the family that once printed my name on invitations but left no chair for me, but in the very place I had built, from the pieces they once threw away. A sparrow landed near the foot of the bench, tilted its head to glance at me, then fluttered up to the rooftop of the Hannah Project. I stayed still, letting everything unfold as it was. No rush. No noise needed to confirm that I had arrived. Because sometimes what speaks the loudest is what goes unspoken. I remained there, one hand resting gently on the notebook, eyes following the sky as it began to shift to a soft pale gold. Everything that once felt broken was starting to take new shape. Not as it had been, but as it was always meant to be. I still wonder, if you were me, what would you do? When your family turned their backs, when trust ran dry, and when you found yourself between two choices, to walk forward in silence or turn back to set things right. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever felt forgotten by the very people you loved the most? If you've had to stand up alone, how did you make it through? Leave a few lines below. I read every word, every sentence, because I believe each of us carries a story that deserves to be heard. And if stories like this one speak to something in your heart, don't forget to follow the channel. I'll be sharing more journeys ahead, unexpected, heartfelt, and deeply real, about families where love can be the strongest bond, or the deepest cut. Thank you for sitting with me through to the end. We'll meet again in another quiet morning where truth, trust, and the people once overlooked might just bring about the greatest change.